Welcome to the adventures of a serial entrepreneur. My name is Rick Chisholm and I'm here with my wife Tyler Chisholm, and we are going to be telling you thousands of stories over many episodes about all the different things that we've been doing for the last, well in my case, almost 50 years, would you believe? And Tyler, in her case, about 1,000? No, about 30 years. So there's a lot of good things that we can tell you about, and hopefully you can take away a few lessons from the different things that we've been doing over the collective 80 odd years. And there's, above all, you'll be able to take away a lot of lessons from the different things that we have done which we stuffed up, and I mean monumentally stuffed up. So I think that's probably the number one thing. You know, Tyler, in her own businesses in the last X number of years, has turned over in excess of $100 million odd in revenue. That may sound impressive and it may sound, you know, glorious and so forth, but in fact, there's a lot of ugliness underneath that. So I would like to introduce you to Tyler. She's going to say a few things and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Rick. So Rick has been in business for, well, officially 35 years, but really I know the story, and he's been in business since he was about 8 or 9, I think, from memory. So it goes a lot longer than the official years in business. He's turned over more than $300 million, and that's revenue. You know, one of the lessons we'll talk about is how irrelevant revenue is, but we only mention it here because we believe that it's important to explain that we've been around. It's important for you to know that we haven't just run one business or been around for run a couple of $1 million worth of business and now we're telling the world about it. It's really we've done quite a bit of business in order to put ourselves in this category.
We've been down the tracks.
We've been down the tracks, exactly. So
around the block.
Around the block, whatever you like. So today's episode is going to be about the beginnings. And, in Rick's case, it started pretty early at the tender age of, what, 8? 9? 9. So without further ado, tell us all about it.
Actually, it might have been 8.
See, I know better than you.
Yeah, actually, I thought it was 9, but it might have been 8. It was 1970.
Okay.
Yeah. I had my first mini bike. I got my first mini bike on Christmas Day, 1970.
What's a mini bike?
A mini bike is a little tiny motorbike.
Okay.
My first motorbike had no gears. It was run by a lawnmower engine. And I took 2 bikes like a fish out of water, and ultimately that became...
Maybe in water.
Yeah. Well, I was a good rider even from the very first day. It was Christmas Day, and it was underneath the Christmas tree. My dad carried it down the steps, pull start engine.
Okay.
And I then was riding around all over the streets. Pair of thongs and shorts, singlet. Was the standard safety issue equipment back then, and I was making a lot of noise on that day. But anyway, that bike didn't last long because I wore it out pretty quick, and within about 3 months I would have been heading towards the age of 9. I ended up getting a bike that had a gearbox, no clutch. So anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. The point is that I had started renting out my motorbike in the local park, and I was charging 20 cents a lap to other people. And I guess that was my first taste of, getting ROI, return on investment, for something that I didn't buy. And I got into a lot of trouble over that because my dad caught me doing it. It was a huge park and it was a big lap.
So you were in business at the age of 9, pretty much.
Sort of.
Yep.
Part-time after school.
Okay.
I was like a side hustle.
Oh well, please.
Anyway, my dad, he was a truck driver. He was in business. Actually, no, at that point, he was running an asphalt business. Yeah. And he was a bit of a perfectionist in running this business. And the asphalt that he laid basically didn't wear out. It lasted forever. So ultimately, and very sadly, my dad went broke. Not bankrupt, but broke. So when you hear people say they went broke, it doesn't mean to say they went bankrupt. In his case, he was broke, but he paid everyone what money he owed over a period of time, 100 cents on the dollar. So
when you say he went broke, can you explain a little bit further what you mean as the reason why you felt he went broke?
Well, I think, he was too honest. He was too when when the thing about asphalt is it's meant to wear out. It's like a car never lasts forever if you're driving it around. Well, he laid asphalt back in the 60s. It's still there today.
Gosh.
So he really was good at what he did, but I think perhaps he may have underquoted
And over delivered, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, this is a common thing that we see in business a lot. We've been victim to it as well, and we've seen many others do it, where we want to do the job really, really well. We want to deliver, 1,000%. But at the end of the day, perfection is not necessarily the best way to go about business unless you are getting paid accordingly. I mean, there's nothing wrong in being absolutely perfect if what you're getting paid is consistent with the quality that you're delivering. But sometimes delivering too much, it can definitely put you in that situation. I totally agree with that. And quite often, being absolutely super perfect with a product before you launch it, or with a service before you launch it, can end up resulting in nothing happening at all. And again, we've been victim to that as well, haven't we?
That's right.
So yeah, it's, I totally understand what you mean.
So I think one of the lessons in this first episode is the principle of starting early, getting on with things, and hard work. I mean, he always said to me, my dad was a big influence on me. He always said, don't end up like me on the end of a pick and shovel. After the asphalting business, he then became a truck driver, and he had tip trucks. And he used to start at like 4 o'clock in the morning. He ended up scaling that business by bootstrapping, living on the smell of an oily rag. And he won a contract for a company called Asphalt Concrete, which was owned by Esso, to have exclusive supply of the trucks to Esso for, taking the asphalt and taking it out to put onto the road, as it were. He didn't lay the asphalt, he just carted the asphalt. Anyway, the bottom line is that Asphalt Concrete didn't come through with the work, and so he ended up with all these assets, and he had truck drivers and no work. He went broke again.
See, I mean, another good lesson here. It's a great thing to have these partnerships and sources for recurring revenue, etc., etc., which is obviously what he had in mind, which was a great concept. But having too many eggs in the one basket, clearly that broke the camel's back.
That's right.
Because you bought assets, you said, and I remember you also saying at some point he put on drivers, full-time drivers. So he loaded his business way too early with that one major client, and then when that major client didn't come through, everything,
That's right.
went down. Yeah.
Anyway, as what happens commonly, my mum and dad got divorced when I was 12, and he moved away, and so I lived with my mother. My sister is much older than me. She had already moved out by this stage, and so I was living in a dysfunctional family, as many people do, and we were basically battlers. So I was, already in the side hustling, and ended up, I had a newspaper run. I built that up. Newspaper run, back then, actually I keep saying but you might not know, especially if you're overseas and you don't know how these newspaper runs, for example, work. So you'd have a wheelbarrow, you push down the street, you had a whistle, you blow the whistle, and people would come out and buy the newspaper from you. It's like 20 cents for a newspaper or something back then, I can't remember. And it was in the afternoon. The newspapers were delivered in the afternoon, not in the morning. When people today buy the newspapers in the morning. Bit of trivia there for you. So I built that up and I sold that business, like a newspaper run, for $40. And that was big money at that point in time, I used to deliver...
So how do you sell a newspaper run? What's there to sell?
Well, I'm selling goodwill because I built up this run, had all these regulars, the wheelbarrow would be full of papers. By the time I went back to the newsagent, there'd be no papers left.
So you'd figured out which streets to go down and which ones to not bother with and so on, right?
And I was the good guy and had good relationships with the people. Yeah, g'day, John, how you going? 20 cents, thanks very much, etc., etc.
All right, yeah.
So then I started to deliver medication to the elderly on my push bike, working for a pharmacy. I did that. I worked in a nursery on Saturdays all day, for a full day on Saturdays. I did all sorts of things. And meantime, I would meet my dad either for the weekend or just on Sunday morning. He'd take me back home on Sunday night. And our life with my dad and myself revolved around motorbikes. My first career officially, I guess, was motocross. And it's not something you should try at home. It's a bit dangerous. Anyway, I did motocross for a decade, all through the 70s. And it became such a big thing that by the time I finished high school, I had to choose between going full-time in motocross. In fact, by the time I was 15, 16, it was becoming very, very clear I had to choose between motocross and academia. Anyway, I kept going through the HSC and squeezed both.
High school certificate.
High school certificate, year 11, year 12, and squeezed them both in. And at the end, I went to university after that. Basically, I gave motocross the flick, which I always regretted because I think that I probably would have been the Australian champion the year after I flicked. But I said to myself that because it's a very short-term career, most people end up stopping, in their early 20s due to injury. So I ended up going to university, and I had pretty ordinary marks from high school. I was average all through high school. One reason for that was the amount of time and effort I was putting into motocross. Nonetheless, I was no Rhodes Scholar. I wasn't a bright spark. I went into university. I'll never forget. I did engineering. The lecturer, February 1981, his name was Dr. Ashley. The very first lecture, there would have been at least 200 people in the room, I reckon. And he said, hands up all of those who got between 400 or above 400 in their higher school certificate. And the way it was graded back then was, it was out of 500 was the score. To get into engineering back then, there was a shortage of engineers. And so the entry mark was quite low. It was only 250 for doing one of the hardest things you could do at university. And anyway, all of those above 400, he asked to put their hands up, so all the hands go up. Not everyone, but at least half. And then he said, and to put this in perspective, just over 400 was the same marks that you needed for medicine, dentistry, and so forth. And that was, in that league. And he said, hands up all of those who got between 300 and 400. And so all the other half of the hands went up. And then he said, hands up those who got between 250 and 300. And that was the losers, right? And of course, that was me, because I sat in that score range. And two hands went up. That was my hand and another guy's hand. And he said, keep your hand up, push it up all the way. And he said, everyone else in the room, I want you to look at those two guys. And
that would have been embarrassing.
It was embarrassing. I felt like, what the hell is this? Where's this leading to? And he said, everyone else. He said, see those two guys? They're going to get first and second place come the first mid-semester exams. And that set the tone for me in terms of how it was I was going to approach things moving forward. So
I mean, it's a really powerful message, that, isn't it?
It
really is all about mindset, and if you believe that you can do it, etc., etc. And at the end of the day, he just planted that in your head. He said you will do it, and
that's right.
Immediately made a huge difference to your actual performance. And you're saying you really did end up being in the top.
And here's the thing. So at this point, I had a full-time job. I had a house. I was paying rent. I was going to university part-time. I went to the library every night and studied. When I wasn't at a lecture, I was at the library till 10 o'clock until they kicked me out every night. And sure enough, I got first place in the mid-semester exams. So that told me that if you want something bad enough, you'll get it. It's as simple as that. What you put in is what you get out. Didn't matter that other people there might have had a higher IQ, or they got, an average of 90% in every exam that they sat for the HSC. It meant nothing in the scheme of things. A lot of those people who had those high marks and so forth, people who have lots of degrees and letters after their name, they sit back on their laurels and they think that it's just going to come easy. Nothing comes easy. There's no such thing. So I went through university, graduated with honors and so forth. It was pretty tough. But you contrast that. I've come out with an honors degree in engineering, gone in from a dysfunctional family that was absolutely dead broke, against something like my dad, who's struggling, working 2 jobs, full-time jobs, 20 hours a day, 100 hours a week between Monday and Friday. You heard that right, from 2 a.m. till 10 p.m. And at this point, for the last couple of years of high school, he was living in a caravan. And I went and stayed with him for a few months. And I was running 3 kilometers every morning at 6 in the morning. I felt so sorry for my dad. I would run down to the pub that he was working at as a cleaner and as a maintenance person of a nighttime. For the second job, he was a barman. And then I would help him vacuum the entire hotel, and then I would run 3 kilometers back. Now, this time, fitness was important to me because I was doing motocross, and it's a really strenuous sport, so I didn't mind that. But, I was starting at 6 in the morning, studying and doing all sorts of things, even at the age of, 15 and 16. So it's never too young to start. You're never too young to start, and you're never too old to start, which you'll hear in later episodes about many of the businesses which we started, and especially in my case, given that I'm a lot older than Tyler, 12 years older. And I've started businesses in my 50s. So you're never too old to start. And so all through after high school and at uni, not only did I have the full-time job, but I started doing things like selling cars, buying and selling cars.
Not as a car salesman, right?
No, just on the side.
Yeah.
Again, to make it
Just
quick.
getting a good deal, buying it, selling it a few months later or whatever.
I remember buying my boss's car for $4,000 in my first job in '81. And I drove around with this thing thinking it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I sold it for $6,000. That's $2,000 GP.
That's right. After using it.
After using it for 12 months.
Yeah, why not?
So I guess the primary thing out of this introduction, if you will, for this first episode that I would take away from this reflecting is the principle of having a side hustle. There's nothing wrong with that. Doesn't matter what it is. But the lessons that I learned from all of these things, and I only just touched on it, there's many more things I did during those years as a teenager and even as a kid. They're the same principles that I apply today in business. The grind. There's no point grinding away like my dad did sometimes, and I'm guilty of it as well, where simply you're doing it for the grind and for no other reason but to hit your head against the brick wall. And sure, you may be keeping your head above water and you may scale, but if you're scaling like my dad did when he had the trucking business, he was borrowing lots of money to buy those trucks, and the money he was making from grinding away was barely covering the repayments. So I guess that's, we don't want to confuse the grind with being smart and making profits. So whilst, my revenues in business up until the time of making this recording exceed way beyond $300 million, again, it sounds flash. And the only reason we're telling you that is, or I'm saying that, and Tyler has already talked about that, it's a reflection of our experiences as opposed to our success. Sure, there's been big successes, but there's also been so many failures. And I think the number one thing to learn from is both success and failure. But I guess don't focus on revenue. Don't focus on the grind by itself. And certainly in today's age, and at the time of recording this, it's 2019, nearly 2020, don't focus on looking at all the letters after your name. I mean, you can go to university today in so many degrees, if it's technology or even if it's business. Like you can get a degree from business school. That does not set you up to be good in business. You can go and get an MBA. That does not set you up for being good in business. It'll set you up good, to be good at other things. You'll be a good academic, perhaps. You'll be good at the big end of town in corporate, but it doesn't translate to business. I mean, a lot of technology degrees you do today, by the time you get to year 3, what you learned in year 1 is already out of date. But there is logic behind getting degrees and studying and so forth because of the principle of what I call brain strengthening. And nothing gets on my goat more than people thinking that you don't have to put anything in to get something out. And you can, through not so much luck, but the principle of, I don't know, what's the principle? There's an expression for this. I can't
Silver
remember.
bullet, trying to find the silver bullet or the quick
Yeah.
answers.
There is no silver bullet. I mean, sure, some people get lucky. They may get a client that is happy to pay them more than everybody else, and every now and then you will get lucky. But at the end of the day, what you put in is what you get out. I mean, that's my 2 bobs worth from where I come from.
I agree. And at the end of the day, a business has to be based on solid foundations. And those foundations are really all about value that you're offering and what you're asking and the margin that you're making and the expenses that you have and the capacity to repeat over and over and over with a consistent level of quality, et cetera, et cetera. So all these things, we're going to be talking about all of that in a great detail over all the episodes that are coming up, all the lessons that we've learned. But these are the essentials, and they will continue, and they will continue, and they will continue, and there's no end to it as to the importance of those essentials. Anyone can win the lottery if they're lucky enough, but most of those people that win the lottery end up losing that money. So it's not just about getting that money once, it's about consistently being able to repeat.
Yeah, I mean, just little things, I remember when I was a kid, I went into debt. And there's good debt and there's bad debt. So I would deliberetely lay-by things. If you don't know what lay-by means, is you pay a deposit, the retailer or whatever it is, they'll put it aside for you and hold on to it for maybe up to 3 months, and every week you go and pay a small payment. I'll never forget, when I was just a kid, I wanted this digital fancy clock. Because digital...
Well, that's bad debt.
Well, to me, it was like, I wanted this clock, and what it did was...
Luxury item.
It was a luxury item, but I needed an alarm clock.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, well, yeah.
And I wanted the alarm clock to play the radio when it went off, not just beep, 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 right? Anyway, so, and like that would have been like $30 back then because it was digital. Right. And then, you buy a brand new one today, 40 years later, 45 years later for $10.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went down there. I had to make money, and every week I'd go down and pay like $1 or whatever it was. And so I got into this habit. So in my second year of university, I started a coaching college. We taught engineering science, chemistry, physics, mathematics, right up until about first-year university students. And that business was going... It was going like crazy. It was just scaling so fast. And the thing about the way in which we delivered the content was based around practical examples. So we wouldn't just teach something for the sake of teaching it. We would say, and this is where it has application. And this resonated with people. And it was just word of mouth. We just kept on getting so many students. But then... something really funny happened. We had a 21st birthday. When I say we, a mate of mine and myself, we had a joint 21st birthday, and we had a DJ come to that. And that DJ charged us $130, all right?
That would have been big money back then.
Well, it was big money back then. And the thing is that the equipment that he had there was the same as my stereo that I had in my lounge room. And I got to thinking, and I thought, well, I can do that. So I went and modified my stereo into a DJ system and put an ad in the paper, went and bought some music and waited for the phone to ring. and the phone rang straight away. And like within a couple of weeks, I was on stage playing music at some dude's 21st birthday, and the week after that. And then it just went like, it grew so quickly. It doubled in size every year. I mean, we'll talk about that particular business later. It's a very, very good business model to analyze.